Welcome to the Blessors of Israel podcast. I'm Matthew Dodd, Executive Director of Blessors of Israel. One of the most hotly debated topics concerning Israel is the question of Israel's claim to the land it currently occupies, also known as the Promised Land. Now, in episode 4, I answered the question, does Israel have any right to claim this land as their own? If you haven't watched episode 4, I encourage you to do so, for it lays the foundation for what I will share in this episode and the next one. For this episode, I want to address the topic from slightly a different angle. The question is this: has Israel lost its claim to the Promised Land? Specifically, when Israel failed to keep the law of Moses and was sent into exile, did Israel lose its claim to the Promised Land? To answer this question, we need to determine the type of covenant that God established with Israel on Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 20, and then compare it with the covenant that God established with Abram in Genesis 15. By way of review, in biblical times, there were 3 types of covenants: grant covenants, suzerain vassal covenants, and parity covenants. For our purposes, we will focus on the first 2 types of covenants, the grant and suzerain vassal covenants. In a grant covenant, the king promised to give land and or privileges to his subject, the vassal. The king took the oath, not the vassal. The grant covenant was unilateral, which means the king bound himself to the terms of the covenant. And the grant covenant was unconditional, which means the fulfillment of the terms by the king was not dependent upon the vassal's obedience. Next, let's look at the suzerain vassal covenant. It was imposed by a king on his subjects, the vassals. The oath was taken by the inferior party, the vassal or servant. It was unilateral, which means the inferior party was bound to keep the terms of the covenant. It was also conditional, which means if the vassal obeyed, he or she would be blessed according to the terms of the covenant. But if the vassal disobeyed, he or she would be cursed according to the terms of the covenant. We established in episode 4 that the Abrahamic covenant is a grant covenant. Question: is the Mosaic covenant a grant or suzerain vassal covenant? Answer: the Mosaic covenant is a suzerain vassal covenant. Why? Because Israel was bound by the terms of the covenant. Just look at the terms of the covenant in Exodus chapter 20. Verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Verse 7, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Verse 8, remember the Sabbath. Verse 12, honor your father and your mother. Verse 13, you shall not commit murder. Verse 14, you shall not commit adultery. Verse 15, you shall not steal. Verse 16, you shall not bear false witness. And verse 17, you shall not covet. Question: did Israel know it was a suzerain vassal covenant and then agree to its terms? Answer: yes. In Exodus chapter 24, verses 3 through 4, we're told, then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do. Question: when Israel failed to keep the Mosaic covenant, did their failure nullify the grant covenant that God established with Abram? Answer: no. Remember that God bound himself by an oath to keep the terms of the grant covenant that he established with Abram in Genesis 15. Therefore, the terms of the Abrahamic covenant remain intact even though Israel failed to keep the terms of the Mosaic covenant. This point is confirmed by the fact that God promised to restore Israel back to the Promised Land even after they had been sent into exile, according to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 3. Here we're told, so it shall be, When all of these things have come upon you, the blessings and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind in all the nations where the Lord your God has banished you, and you return to the Lord your God, and obey him with all your heart and soul according to all that I command you today, you and your sons, then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. Again, God established a grant covenant with Abram, which means God bound himself by an oath to unilaterally and unconditionally give the land to Abram and his descendants forever. So, Israel has not lost its claim to the promised land because the Abrahamic covenant is still intact. To receive the latest news concerning Israel with biblical commentary, please visit our website at www.blessors.org. That's Blessors, BLESSORS.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Getter. And please subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble channels. We also appreciate your prayers and financial support as we build this new ministry. Thanks again for joining me. Remember, those who bless Israel will be blessed. Shalom, shalom.